Hi again, Hallie. It's Aunt Nissa. Do a little more reading today in our book, Summer of the Monkeys. Remember when we left off, the family was leaving for the Oklahoma Territory. Okay? When Papa told me that part of the story, he laughed and said, "If anyone ever asks you how to get from Missouri to the Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma, you just tell them that you rode in a wash tub every inch of the way." The day they reached Grandpa's store, Papa was just about all in and had his mind set on sleeping in one of Grandma's feather beds. Mama wouldn't listen to that kind of talk at all. She had waited so long for a farmer of her own, she was bound and determined to spend the night on her own land. Grandma tried to talk some sense into Mama. She told her that the land was only 3 miles down the river and it certainly wasn't going to run away. They could stay all night with them, rest up, and go on the next day. Mama puffed up like a sittin' hen in a hailstorm. Nothing Grandma or Grandpa said changed her mind. She told Papa that he could stay there if he wanted to. She'd just take Daisy and me and go on by herself. Papa knew better than to open his mouth because once Mama had made up her mind like that, she wouldn't have budged an inch from a buzzing rattler. There wasn't but one thing that he could do. He just climbed back in the wagon, unwrapped the check lines from the brake, and said, "Get up," to those old Missouri mules. It was in the twilight of the evening when Mama and Papa reached the land of their dreams. They camped for the night in a grove of tall, white sycamores right on the bank of the Illinois River. Papa said that as long as he lived, he'd never forget that night. It seemed to him that they were being welcomed by every living thing in those Cherokee bottoms. Whippoorwills were calling, and the nighthawks were crying as they dipped and darted through the starlit sky. Bullfrogs and hoot owls were jarring the ground with their deep voices. Even the little speckled tree frogs and katydids and the crickets were chipping in with their nickel's worth of welcome music. A big grinning Ozark moon crawled up out of nowhere and seemed to say, "Hi, neighbor. I've been looking for you. It gets kind of lonesome out here. Welcome to the land of the Cherokee." Papa said Mama was so taken in by all of that beauty, she seemed to be hypnotized. She just stood there in the moonlight with a warm little smile on her face, staring out over the river, her black eyes glowing like black hawks in the morning dew. Finally, she gave a deep sigh, just to see as if she had dropped something heavy from her shoulders. Then, spreading her arms out wide, she said in a low voice, "It's the work of the Lord. That's just what it is. Just think, all of this is ours, 60 acres of it." Papa said he was feeling so good that he could have walked right out on the waters of the rivers, just as Jesus did when he walked out on the waters of the sea. Mama was a little woman, barely tipping the scales at 100 pounds, but what she lacked in height and weight, she made up in strength and spirit. Pulling her end of a cross-cut saw and swinging the heavy blade of a double-bitted axe, she helped Papa clear the land. Papa let Mama pick the spot for our log house. This wasn't an easy chore for her. She walked all over that 60 acres, looking and looking. Finally, she found the very spot she wanted and put her foot down. It was in the foothills, overlooking the river bottom in the mouth of the Little Blue Canyon. I grew up on that Cherokee farm, and it was just about as wild as the gray squirrels in the sycamore trees and as free as the red-tailed hawks that weed their cries in those Ozark skies. I had a dandy pocket knife and a darn good dog, and that was about all a boy could hope for in those days. My little sister Daisy grew up too, but not like I did. It seemed as if that old leg of hers held her growing back. Each year it got worse and worse. The foot part kept twisting and twisting until finally she couldn't walk on it at all. And that's when Papa made a crutch for her out of a red oak limb with a fork on one end. The way Daisy could zip around on that old homemade crutch was something to see. She could get around on it just about as well as I could on two straight legs. It was always a mystery to me how my little sister could be so happy and so full of life with an old twisted leg like that. She was always laughing and singing and hopping around on that old crutch, just as if she didn't have a worry in the world. Her one big delight was in getting me all riled up by poking fun at me. She never looked an opportunity, and it seemed that these opportunities came up about every 15 minutes. Up on the hillside from our house, under a huge red oak tree, Daisy had a playhouse. From early spring until late fall, practically all of her time was spent there. I didn't like to mess around Daisy's playhouse. Every time I went up there, I had kind of a guilty feeling like maybe I shouldn't be there. She had all kinds of girl stuff sitting around, corn shuck dolls, mud pies, and pretty bottles. She treasured every tin can that came into our home, and in each one some kind of wildflower peeked out. At one end of her playhouse, Daisy had built a little altar. She had made a cross by tying 2 grapevines together and covering them with tinfoil. The face of Christ was there too. Daisy had molded it from red clay. For the eyes, she had pressed blue shells from a hatched-out robin's nest into the soft clay. She had covered the crown with moss to resemble hair. When Mama discovered that the moss was actually growing in the soft clay, she told everyone in the hills about it. People came from miles around to see the miracle. I never saw anything like it. It was pretty around Daisy's playhouse, especially in the early spring when the dogwoods, redbuds, and mountain flowers were blooming. Warm little breezes would whisper down from the green, rugged hills, and the air would be so full of sweet smells it would make your nose tickle and burn. If you closed your eyes and filled your lungs full of that sweet-smelling stuff, your head would get as light as a hummingbird's feather and feel as if it was going to sail away by itself. Daisy was never alone in her playhouse. She had all kinds of little friends. Big fat bunnies, red squirrels, and chipmunks would come right up to her and eat from her hand. She wouldn't be in her playhouse for 5 minutes until all kinds of wild birds would come winging in from the mountains. They would sit around in the bushes and sing so happy and loud that the mountains would even ring with their birdie songs. Sometimes they would even light on her shoulders. Hold on one sec. Thank you. I never could understand how my little sister made friends with all the birds and animals. I couldn't get within a mile of anything that had hair or feathers on it. Daisy says it was because I was a boy and I was catching things all the time. One morning in the early spring, Papa came in from doing the chores with an empty milk bucket in his hand. He looked grouchy and didn't even say good morning to any of us. This was so unusual that right away Mama knew something was wrong. From the cook stove where she was fixing our breakfast, Mama smiled and said, "Knowing how desperate you are to get the planting done, I'd say it was going to rain." "No," Papa said in a disgusted voice. "It's not going to rain. Sally Gooden's gone again." Sally Gooden, our crazy old milk cow. "Oh, no," Mama exclaimed. "Not again." "I just can't understand that old cow," Papa said, shaking his head. "Just last week I put an extra rail on the pasture fence. It didn't do any good, though. She sailed over it as if it wasn't even there." Turning to me, Papa said, "Jay Barry, you'll have to find her. That's all there is to it. It's wild onion time, and if she gets a belly full of those things, her milk won't be any good for days. And we can't do without milk and butter." When Papa asked me to do important things like that, it made me feel just about as big as those Ozark Mountains around our log house. I puffed out my chest and said, "I'll find Sally Gooden, Papa. She's probably down at the river bottoms. That's where I usually find her." It seemed that Papa and I never could hold a man-to-man conversation without Mama getting all worked up, especially if we were talking about going down to those river bottoms. Mama frowned and said, "That crazy old cow anyhow. Jay Barry, you be careful. I worry every time you go down in those bottoms." "Worry?" I said, big-eyed. "Why, Mama, what do you have to worry for? I've been all over those bottoms. You know that." "I know," Mama said. but I worry just the same. It's no place for a 14-year-old boy. Why, it's a regular jungle down there. You can't see 10 feet in any direction. There are snakes, wild hogs, and goodness knows what all. Oh, Mama, I said, you make it sound like I was going to the jungles in Africa or something. I've chased Sally Gooden out of those bottoms 1,000 times, and nothing's happened yet. Besides, Rowdy's with me, and he wouldn't let anything get within a mile of me. I didn't know it at the time, but about a half an hour later, I wasn't so sure that I was in Africa, the deepest part of Africa. Okay, I'm going to put our little bookmark in, and we'll stop there for today. But isn't it exciting? Jay Barry and his family have a new home and all kinds of property, and new adventures are going to happen. And they seem to be settling in just fine. So, I'm going to close for now, but I look forward to reading to you some more this week, okay? Love you guys.